Good afternoon and welcome to our sixth English lesson. Today we are going to focus on adverbs of frequency. Adverbs of frequency, well, they are words, simply putting into words, they are words that we use to express how often, how frequent an action is done. That means how many times I do that action in a period of time. Okay? As you can see here, what is an adverb? First, adverbs are words that we use to modify a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. We use them to give the modified word a new or more complete meaning, and there are many kinds of adverbs. For example, we can modify a verb if we put an adverb. We can say, I eat, but if I say, I eat slowly, that means that I don't eat fast, that I take my time to eat. We can also say, in this case, I go to the park. But if I say I go to the park very often, that means that 2 or 3 days of the week I go to the park. If I say I always go to the same park, that means that every time that I go to a park, I go to that park, that I go always. Okay? For that, we use adverbs, and in this case, adverbs of frequency. Okay, we modify a verb in order to describe how often we do that action. And as you can see here, we have the definition. There are many kinds of adverbs that can express a huge variety of meanings. However, we are just talking about adverbs of frequency today. We use them to express the frequency in which we carry out an activity or in which an action is done. In other words, we use them to talk about how often something happens. And that's how we use adverbs of frequency. We have also the definition, and we're going to see some examples. How to use them? If there is only one verb in the sentence, for example, I go to the park, or I eat pizza, or I swim at the pool, then we put the adverb between the subject and the verb that is modified. I swim in the pool. I often swim in the pool. I sometimes swim in the pool. I usually swim in the pool. So the adverb is going to be placed between the personal pronoun or the subject and the verb. Okay, in the middle of those two parts, you are going to place the adverbs of frequency. If there are two verbs, an auxiliary or a modal, and the main verb, for example, I don't swim in the pool. I don't eat pizza. She doesn't go to the park. We put the adverb before the main verb. So, we don't usually swim in the pool. She doesn't usually go to the park, and so on. Finally, if the sentence is negative or interrogative form, then we put the adverb before the main verb. There are some adverbs that can be placed after or before the main verb. For example, sometimes, for example, very often. Okay, now we have a rubric and some examples of adverbs of frequency. They are placed from the top until the bottom, organized by the frequency that they express. For example, when I say always, that means that every time that I do that action, okay, it is 100%. Then we have usually, very often, often, sometimes, eventually, rarely, hardly ever, and never. Okay, I'm going to explain this part in Spanish so that it is clear. Okay, tenemos esta lista de adverbios de frecuencia y al lado tenemos unos porcentajes. ¿Qué quieren decir esos porcentajes? Representan el número de veces o la frecuencia con la que hacemos la acción que se modifica. Si yo digo, I always go to that park, significa que siempre que salgo al parque voy a ese. Si yo digo, I often go to that park, significa que algunas veces voy a ese, algunas veces no, pero el 60% de las veces voy a ese parque. Estos porcentajes son aproximaciones. no quiere decir que sean una regla, ¿no? Son aproximaciones. I hardly ever go to the park means that I almost never. Okay? Casi nunca voy a ese parque. I hardly ever. Okay? Here we have some examples. I sometimes go to the cinema. And here we have sometimes. Okay? I sometimes go to the cinema. She hardly ever swims in the sea. We often go for a walk in this park. We usually have dinner at 9 o'clock. Okay, we have hardly ever. We have usually, sometimes, and often. We don't usually go to the park. As I was telling you, the adverb goes between the auxiliary and the main verb when we have two verbs. Do you often eat fish? We never travel abroad on summer. They rarely are at the office at this hour. We normally, almost always, using the adverbs of frequency, we almost always have positive adverbs of frequency. Okay, tenemos los positivos que prácticamente son estos hasta sometimes y tenemos estos que son como negativos. Entonces no es necesario usar frases negativas. Con el único adverbio con el que es recomendable usar oraciones negativas es con usually. No quiero decir que con los demás no se pueda, pero lo más común es eso. And well, there we have some other time expressions or adverbs that we can also use. Once a day, I take a shower once a day. I go outside once per week. Or I visit my grandmother once a year. Okay, esto quiere decir una vez. Twice, dos veces. 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, y podemos poner día, semana, mes o año. Cualquier cosa está bien. The important thing here is that you can express how often you do an action. Here we have some examples. We walk our dog twice a day. I go cycling once or twice a week. A new chapter is released weekly. Weekly means every week. We can say weekly or once a week. We can say daily or once a day. Okay? We usually eat chicken 4 times a week. And that's all for adverbs of frequency. Remember that we use them, in most of the cases, we use them for talking about routines. Okay? Como estamos hablando de algo que es fijo, de algo que tiene ciertos periodos de tiempo, por lo general lo usamos para hablar de rutinas. Es el uso más común que tienen estas palabritas. So, today's lesson is going to end here. I hope that everything's clear. Remember that you have exercises. Please practice and happy learning. See you on the following lesson.